Hello, and welcome to Self Sovereignty, the YouTube channel where we focus on personal accountability, individual growth, self care, and overall well being. And welcome to the start of another new year. And to get the new year off on the right foot, in this episode, we're going to speak with Randy Vander Veen. Randy is a leading fitness and movement coach dedicated to helping clients restore their core body balance and mobility. Randy has been on the channel with us a couple times before, and I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation. So much so, it might even leave you wanting to try a few cartwheels at the end. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Hello and welcome, Randy. I want to thank you for joining us again to the Self Sovereignty YouTube channel. We've had you on a couple times, and it's always been inspirational. Yeah, I think in the past we've talked about some things that folks could do during these long, dark days of winter, as well as things that they can do to start getting back into shape for the new year and the coming of the spring. So I really appreciate you taking time to meet with us.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for that introduction. And thanks for having me on, Steve. I do really enjoy our dialogues that we've had in the past. And I find that we can somehow just explore new territory together anytime that we get together like this. So it's
Yeah.
great. My name is Randy Vander Veen, and I'm a movement specialist. And what I mean by that is I help people move better. That could be athletes, young athletes who are looking to add explosiveness. They're looking to add more dynamic movements to whatever it is their skill set that they're attacking, whether that's young wrestlers or football, soccer players, you name it. But really, where I've been putting a lot of my focus in the idea of specializing in movement is to the everyday the average adult
Mm.
who has found that they really haven't moved dynamically in the last 15, 20 years, possibly, maybe even more, where life has taken hold of them. They no longer participate in playground activities. They no longer participate in youth sports. They've grown up, they've gotten a job, and they have more important things to do. And somehow movement is left out of that picture until it becomes one of those things that they can no longer do the way that they would like. And that's where I see the biggest impact of what I study, what I focus on, and that is the human body and how miraculously it is
Mhm.
created and how miraculously it can be used to move through our environments. And so I know that's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the philosophy that I use to help people move better.
I love that, Randy, because it's so profound because you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm a little bit older now, and I don't move like I used to. And I think back of some simple things that I used to be able to do in my youth as a kid, and it's also degrading sometimes. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't even bend over and tie my shoe. And that's a stretch. I'm just, hypothetically, but bend over and tie my shoe without getting winded or having to hold on to something and sit down. So it's like, I guess that's maybe like a lack of balance. So that might fit in there. It's like the importance of balance in your everyday life kind of goes away because we don't, focus on that maybe.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find the verbiage, the words that I keep coming back to is sensory feedback.
Mm.
Um, when we are born into this world, and especially as young movers, toddler age, even before that, infancy, our bodies. I'll take a step back a little bit. We have this idea in society today that there's a mind body duality, meaning there's a mind and then there's a body. And I think we've already gone wrong when we think about it like that. We've lost the wholeness and the unity of the human being, which is both body and mind.
Right,
Body
right.
and body and soul is how I actually like to describe that. So really what's happening from the day that we're born is our bodies and our minds, our bodies and our souls are working together as one unit. And it's our body's job to provide that sensory feedback of gravity and external forces, the ground underneath of us. What happens when I move my leg like this? What happens when I move my other leg like this? And slowly and through development and time, young movers become sophisticated movers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we understand that, especially, I like to call the kids the experts. I think the kids are the sophisticated movers. And rarely in society these days do we call kids more sophisticated than adults.
Right.
However, in the area of movement, they are definitely more sophisticated than the adult. And one of my more favorite, and it's a cute saying, really, one of my most favorite things to use as a pointed example is the cartwheel. You ask any 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old to perform a cartwheel, odds are they're going to be able to do it, and they're going to be able to do it with a smile.
Right.
When we ask an adult to perform a cartwheel, we get a lot of stuttering and stammering and a lot of excuses and a lot of reasons why they shouldn't even have to do a cartwheel. And so that's the difference of sophistication within the movement realm that kids have compared to the adults.
Yeah, and I
And
love. Oh, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say I love that you brought up cartwheel because I was going to ask you about that because I think your opinion is like any grown ass adult ought to be able to do a cartwheel, or something, or be able to get to that. But it's that level of movement and stretching that we should be able to focus on, not necessarily getting big and bulky or going to the gym every day to what is the right approach, and maybe we'll get to that. But
yeah, and I hesitate to use the words right and wrong,
uh-huh.
because a lot of what we're talking about is an individual's specific aim. What are they hoping to get from their practice,
Right.
from the bodily practice that they do? And I hesitate again to call somebody's aim right or wrong, but I think what happens a lot of times is, to be blunt, I think it's vanity is one of the major aims in fitness these days. People simply want to look better, and there's definitely a different approach to, maybe a more shortcut, faster approach to looking better than simply doing cartwheels. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion and a lot of the kind of crooked eye look that I get when I recommend that people do cartwheels for a practice. It's kind of a step back for most individuals because they think, well, how's that going to trim up my waistline, and how is that going to make me look more like the models that I see on the magazine covers? And so right there, we've already got a conflict of aim,
Hmm.
and into what the practice of fitness is going to, what is the desire of the person who's performing the practice.
Yeah, I think
But
that I was gonna say I
I
think that makes perfect sense, and I think there's a whole fitness industry with a mindset that says this is what you're supposed to do. You've got these big box gym stores out there, these fitness centers, 24-hour fitness, and we are almost programmed that this is the way, this is the approach, these are the things that you're doing or that you need to do. And it sounds like you're saying, wait a minute, let's take a step back. Let's look at some alternatives, which is basically getting back to that core body movement that you had when you were a child.
And it comes back to that idea of sensory feedback. And
Hmm.
let me explain myself, because ultimately every movement we make has a feeling. And we can chalk up that feeling. We can simply summarize it. Our body's going to feel good doing it, or it's going to feel bad doing it.
Okay.
And there's a large spectrum there. If you climb a ladder, for instance, that is going to provide a feeling of feedback to your body, or it's going to provide sensory feedback to your body. And then your body starts making up all of these feelings within inside of you. This is difficult. This grip is hurting my hand. I feel like I'm above the ground too far, and I begin to get scared, whatever it may be, or simply just repping out pull-ups. After the eighth, the ninth, the 10th rep, your body is going to understand a feeling. And it's that I try to bring people back to, is that ultimately every one of our movements, even simple big box formed exercises, are going to provide some sort of a feeling within inside of us.
Hmm.
Here's the kicker though, is that and this is just based off of my experience of watching people and relating to people, is that traditional exercise doesn't feel good. And that's not me saying that. That's just watching people. As a human being, we tend to do the things that feel good more often. And if anybody's ever been addicted to a substance, I happen to have been, you can understand how certain actions that we do will provide a certain feeling, and that will prompt us to either avoid that feeling in the future or go after that feeling again. And so I've brought this into the world of exercise because I really think it's important that we analyze and we understand what the movements we're doing, how do they make us feel inside? Because that's going to be a major determinant to if we choose to do it again in the future or not. And
Yeah.
that seems to be the key component for people when they want to get into shape, is that they hope that they're going to be able to do this again next week and the week after and the day after. And hopefully there's going to be some sort of repeating of the actions. And so, to make that happen and to get your body working as a unit, you got to make damn sure that those actions feel good. And so I'll bring it all the way back to the cartwheel. I just watch kids, and I watch even the adults that can do the cartwheels, the adults that even can't do the cartwheels, but they choose to try. It's almost impossible for people to attempt a cartwheel without a smile. I've found that to be the case. And it may be a little bit of a humbling humility aspect to, toppling down on the floor. They look back up and they smile and they giggle and they laugh. And it's like, I didn't expect to fall flat on my butt doing a cartwheel, but here I am. And you have the kids who then want to show off, and they'll do multiple cartwheels in a row, and they're giggling and they're laughing. And so I really have been focusing on that entire idea of making sure that we have a bodily practice, but it's also a bodily practice that makes us feel good. And I think that's the almost the antithesis to the modern day fitness approach of no pain, no gain. If it isn't hurting, you're not working. That whole idea.
Yeah, I love that because it really also aligns back to what I do with helping individuals overcome subconscious mindset, limiting beliefs, self-doubts. I mean, there's something that's holding an individual back from that feel good of moving, that they deserve to be healthy, they deserve to be fit, and so subconsciously, if you don't believe that, you're not going to put your shoes on and go out and do a cartwheel or go to the gym or whatever. And so you're kind of blending that and making a more holistic approach to health rather than just the no pain, no gain approach, I guess.
Yeah, and you know the other part that I see a lot is the entire idea that the human body is a machine, and we've been, for lack of a better word, we've been programmed like a machine. We've been programmed to believe that we are machines, we're machine like, and we have parts and we have components that need to be worked separately. No different than a computer has a hard drive, and then it's got, its modem, or I don't know what computers have anymore, but obviously
Hmm.
there's different parts that fit together and create that whole. I think we're a little bit different, um, and the problem is that, for an analogy purpose, the machine idea works so well with the modern scientific materialistic approach. Um, my own personal faith and other factors added to that, I can't see how breaking breaking down the human being into parts is helpful, because I do believe that we are not separate. Our mind is a product of our body, and our bodies are actually a product of our mind. There's a reciprocal relationship between those two, and to pull them apart is it's it's so tempting for people to do, because that is what we do. If we want to know something, if we want to know more about the vehicle, the car we drive, we break it down into parts and we can understand it better. But that is not the way a human being works. If I simply broke down myself, and I have a toenail and I have an eyelash and I have ears and I have organs inside of me, there's definitely no, by just looking at those parts, there's no way to conceive how miraculous the whole is. And that's different than a car, and that's different than a computer, because you can actually do that with a computer and you can do that with a car. But you can't do that with the human being, because what you get into then is just sort of like I've been alluding to. You get into feelings, and feelings matter.
Mhm.
The way that we feel about certain things, the way that we feel about certain people, that definitely impacts the entire human. And I feel that, again, big box traditional fitness approach is consistently breaking down the human being as a whole and getting us to focus on our parts. Today we have biceps and triceps.
Right.
Tomorrow we will do chest and we will do back. And the beautiful thing about a movement practice that I'm talking about with cartwheels and bear crawls and other exercises that are more dynamic is that the entire body and the mind has to work in synthesis together. And so that's again one of the bigger things that we're going to probably keep coming back to, is the wholeness of our approach to fitness.
Yeah, I love that. And it reminds you, there's a great book out, I think it's from the 60s, called The Brain Gym. And it's all about, and it's focused on kids and learning, but it's adapted and used for adults. There's exercises in this collection, in this book, that I use when I work with individuals to help them overcome limiting beliefs and self-doubts, to kind of align with their current aspirations and goals. Because you have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere of your brain, and you may have a fear of heights. You were talking about stepping up on a ladder or whatever. Something in your past, and you may not know what it was, but something is now preventing you from going more than 3 feet off the ground or whatever. Your brain, your left hemisphere and right hemisphere are not in alignment. You're not whole brained for that ability. But you can get there by doing certain movements and certain postures where you're crossing your arms, you're crossing your legs, you're coming up with a positive thought that is basically, through, and I use a process called PSYCH-K. I'm a facilitator, but it's basically helping individuals change their fundamental subconscious belief about a given situation or condition. And it's kind of like, I use an analogy of, let's say you're in college and you had to write a paper on global warming. And so you wrote this paper, and now a few years later you got to write something again, and you pick global warming because it's like, I did this a couple years ago, you know. Well, things change. And so this is an opportunity to go back to that paper and look at the new statistics. And while you wrote that paper before, the outline, the structure may be the same, but now you're doing a save as and copying over it with new current information. So it's basically you're taking a subconscious perception of who you are or what you can do, and that was all developed when you were within your first 7 years of life,
Yeah.
your limiting beliefs based off of what people told you about yourself. You're not artistic, you're not going to be good at sports, you're clumsy or whatever. Well, you can overwrite that just like you would overwrite a paper with new information. And it's understanding that I can do this, I will do this, I have the ability. And you're kind of taking that, although you're not expressing it, I think you're taking that same fundamental belief or process and instilling it into what you're doing from a um, movement flexibility perspective. And I just love that.
Yeah, it reminds me what the thought came to mind when you're talking there, and I know you're a big fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson as well.
Yeah.
Really what we're talking about is updating our story. Because you hit the nail on the head with the majority of our right brain is working subconsciously to try to take in the bigger picture of what's happening, as our left brain is simply focusing on grabbing what's in front of us and counting our reps and trying to make sense of what we see and touch and can feel. There's so much going on underneath the surface, above the surface. I don't know what analogy to use, but our right brain is constantly analyzing and feeling out. Probably the better word is feeling out our environment. And from a movement perspective, a lot of these things, probably 99% of the way that we move is reflexive. And also, I would use the word subconscious. Um, Fight or flight movements are a perfect example that if somebody takes a strike at me, I'm not going to think about how I clinch myself or how I decide to move. I'm simply going to be reflexive to that movement. And that's one of the bigger things that I believe the cartwheel and I'm going to use the word flow, more flowing movement that combine multiple planes of motion, movements that combine more than one body part, and have to establish a synthesis between them. That flow state of, again, you don't think about doing the cartwheel as you're doing the cartwheel. If
Yeah.
you did, you'd probably hurt yourself. If you actually if your left brain was the one talking you through the cartwheel, you wouldn't have the momentum. You wouldn't have the dynamism that's needed to fulfill the move. And I think, again, we can relate this to our psychology as
Mhm.
well, the way that we think and the way that we respond to new stimulus as it comes into our minds as well. Because even mental stimuli is going to provide, it's going to, that stimulus is going to make our body move in some sort of a direction. It could be just the most minute eye movements. It could be a shoulder shrug if we hear bad news. It could be, the body language of surprise as we lift our arms up to the sky. All of those I use as examples to just show how tightly wired our feelings and our dynamic movement really is. And a practice to develop that is going to enhance not only our physical self, but it's going to enhance our emotional and mental self as well.
It's also going to instill new subconscious memories. And going back to your analogy about, somebody hitting you, you're not going to think about responding. Your body's going to respond. That is your subconscious taking over a situation because your subconscious at any given moment is running 95% of what's going on in your brain. Conscious mind is only 5% active. It's thinking, it's logic. That's why you can be in a car and drive home from work or go to the grocery store. You get home and you're in your driveway and it's like, oh crap, I don't even remember driving here. Your
Right?
subconscious was programmed to do that. But if something along the way happens and you're thinking about, your work and agenda, what you're going to make for dinner, whatever, somebody runs through a red light, you're going to wake up. Your subconscious is going to bring you out of that logical thought and say, something's not right with this situation. It goes back to your fight or flight scenario. You see a saber-toothed tiger, and your subconscious is going to say, have I ever been in this situation before? Is it safe or not? And your subconscious is going to say, no, that's a saber-toothed tiger. Run, you know?
Right.
A good analogy is like people that have a surprise party. You walk in, you've been out shopping with your friend, you open the door, lights come on, immediately you drop your bags, you stop talking or whatever until you recognize friendly faces smiling. Then you know that you have a first person experience with a surprise party for you. You may have been to surprise parties, but you've never been on this side of it. But then,
Yeah.
5 years later, if somebody throws you another surprise party because you're so awesome, as soon as that happens, your subconscious mind is going to say, this is safe. We did this 5 years ago. I reckon
Right.
it's a stored memory, and kind of, so what you're working through is over programming stored memories, and resistance to get healthy or go to the gym, those type of things, and muscle memories.
Yeah, and I love that analogy. Let's just keep driving with it. Imagine every Friday, this first party was thrown on a Friday,
Hmm.
and it completely shocked the hell out of you as you walked into your own apartment with your friend, and there's your family and inner circle there to celebrate.
Right.
And you're blown away. The novelty is obviously overwhelming, and then you settle into a groove and you have a good party. Next Friday, let's say the same thing happens again. You maybe at first you're a little confused as to why your friend is walking you again down your own hallway to your apartment, and it maybe starts to click. Last week we did this. There was a party, but you didn't think about it. The door opens and wham, there's the party again.
Right.
Come next Friday, the third Friday in a row, you're going to start to figure this out, and then slowly but surely, all of that new novelty, all of that new excitement, and spontaneous events, it's packaged down into something that we can then predict and then expect.
Hmm.
And the the problem, if we want to call it that, is how do we navigate life with the proper amount of novelty so that we're not bored off of our ass,
Right.
and but also not being overwhelmed nonstop with chaos. And so we get this, again, Dr. Peterson idea of chaos versus order. And how do we balance those two concepts in our life? The thing that I encourage my clients to do is, we're going to use that magical word that kids love, and it's called play. And play, by definition, is the perfect balance of chaos and order. And if one of those becomes overbalanced, by definition, it's not going to be play any longer. Um, and I think if you've watched young kids play, you can understand that when the game has devolved and there becomes bickering and fighting and chaos,
Hmm.
kids are no longer abiding by the structure of order. They're breaking the rules. They're jostling the rules around a little bit. The idea of play breaks down, and it just becomes chaos in a room with a bunch of little kids screaming. On the flip side of that, when play is too ordered, if you sit 8-year-olds down and try to teach them chess, 99% of them are probably going to say that's not very playful. That wasn't what I considered play. And it's simply too much order for a young 8-year-old. However, each one, chess can definitely be considered play by some temperaments. And those temperaments have found that chess is the perfect balance between potential novelty, new moves, new movements on the board, and the proper balance of order. But I bring that up only because I think, especially adults, we've lost the entire concept of proper play. Play is just deemed as frivolous, something kids do. Again, we grew out of that 20 years ago. I've got a big kid job. I've got bills to pay. I
Right.
got things I got to do. I don't have time to play. And again, from my perspective, that would be a life of way too much order. It'd be way too much boredom and way too much structure. And, those things can lead to spontaneous eruptions of play in areas that we really don't want to, into the red light district of the world type of an idea.
Right. Right.
So
Interesting.
again, I really think that and that brings us to my cartwheel idea, that the more we can add playful movements that walk that very, very tight line between novelty and order, of simply doing something over and over and over again, routine, mundane, repetition, and complete chaos. We have to find what works for us with both of those elements. I really believe that's the missing factor. That, and again, just let's use the word play. People love to play. We're going to want to play again. Play gives us that feeling inside of us that prompts us to find a way to do that again. But
Hmm.
play is also very magical because it doesn't go by a recipe. Sometimes it's hard to actually replicate how you played yesterday again today,
Yeah.
because odds are we'll probably just try to recreate the same situation and have another surprise party on a Friday the next week because it worked out so well the last week. And human beings are funny because we really can't do that to ourselves. Once we begin to do that over and over and over again, the play loses its potency, I guess is a way of putting it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess that's kind of a good segue into how do you get started with this? I was thinking about this from a, New Year's resolution perspective. It's beginning of the new year. I think it was Baylor College of Medicine reported like 88% of all New Year resolutions are dropped by the end of January. I think it was Ohio State Business School that indicated that like I don't know, it's like 23% or so are dropped by the second week of January. I think the second Friday of January is now known as Quitter's Day. That's like most people quit their New Year's resolution on the second Friday of January. It's known. So it's like, is a New Year resolution good or bad? Are you setting yourself up for failure with a New Year's resolution? Or can you achieve, those goals that you want, those changed habits, if you will, by taking an alternative approach? And maybe it's instilling that level of play and then that becomes a mechanism for building a new habit.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great questions. The It's funny, we talked a little bit before we went live about how I've gone full circle, and now I'm back on the pro New Year's resolution camp
Right.
idea. I I think if done with proper grace,
Hmm.
I often go back to, I forget, one of these famous Greek Stoics, maybe Epicurean. Know thyself. Know thyself.
Hmm.
As simple as that. I think I think people have lost touch with who they are, with their
Absolutely.
with their expectations,
Hmm.
um, where they are at currently, which leads to some of those expectations. And I think that the that people make most with New Year's resolutions is trying to achieve too much too fast. I I've gone back to the positive side of the New Year's resolution camp because I think, Steve, I think it's I think it's an intuitive nature for human beings to go through deaths and rebirths. Um, again, this is more of the symbolic thinking, Carl Jung and Dr. Peterson idea that the New Year's resolution is an archaic idea that has probably been with people since the dawn of time, of the cyclical rebirth, the cyclical rejuvenation of biological life.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a calendar of routine. Winter is going to lead to spring, is going to lead to summer, and then it's going to lead back to winter. And there again is that idea of life containing some sort of order. And my personal faith in the first book of the Bible, it declares that quite simply. The world we live in is quite intelligible. It's got an order to it. So I don't like to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, hey, we're not going to recognize this thing that comes around every year. Mm-hmm. Every year we're alive, it comes around. I think to not recognize that as a form of rebirth, as a form of trying again, if for lack of a better word, I think that's a mistake. Now, does it have to be on January 1st, every new year, that we have these symbolic deaths of our prior self to rebirth our new self? I don't think it has to be predictable like that. In fact, probably the less predictable, the better. But one of the things that I've paid attention to more so myself with my own personal practice is the way, again, I'll use the word feel, the way that I feel moving around in the wintertime, the way that I feel moving around in the springtime differ compared to how I move around in the summertime. So these are factors that are outside of my control. And I think where people go wrong is January 1st, we're in the dead of winter. We just finished a complete month of partying, essentially, celebrations and time off of work. It's probably not the ideal time to revolutionize your thinking and physically change your life. In fact, it's probably the worst time to take that on in that level of dimension or in that level of severity, intensity. Whereas I work with my clients to take a smaller bite. You eat an elephant one bite at a time,
right? But
eventually you will get that elephant ate. And I think people underestimate what they can do in a year, but overestimate what they can do in a day. And that approach, if we can reel it back in a little bit and say, it's not much, but I'm going to consistently do this daily and see what that does over an entire year. It's just making that time, that temporal gap from the day you make that decision, being patient with planting the seed today and being able to get the fruit 5, 6, 7 months later. That idea is hard to swallow nowadays in instant gratification world of touching buttons and getting what we want.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying. I mean, it's almost like it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, It's you are not going to achieve, greatness in whatever your, New Year resolution is in the first 2 weeks or first 4 weeks of the year.
It's going back to that idea of our story. You've just simply lost track of the first few chapters and where you are now and where you want your story to go. Because I think if you honestly understand your story and where you want this story to go, things can make a little bit more sense when it comes time to planning that New Year's resolution. And again, that's what I do with my clients is I try to help them find where they're at in their own story. As silly as it sounds, it's difficult to write your own story. It's difficult to figure out where you are at now, where you were at 5 years ago, and how that led to where you're at now. Those are tough concepts to put together, but I think it's really key for success when you're trying to establish a bodily practice. most definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree with it because it's not just a physical component. It is physical and a mindset. It is a more holistic. I mean, you may be working your muscles, but it's your subconscious, mindset of who you really are, your authentic self, and trying to get back to that. And so what did you love when you were a kid? You loved being able to do cartwheels. You loved being able to just get out and play or do things that you stop doing through the years. And it's like find yourself, find your true authentic self, peel the layers off of the onion, all the things that you talked about, the challenges of work and life and the stress and you may find some real life-changing challenges that you have to struggle through along the way, not only from a weight perspective, but career and other decisions to get you back to who you really need to be holistically healthy, physically, mentally, and then to be able to be in a better position to serve others.
Yeah, and I don't know what made me just think of this, but as you know, there's the idea of self-consciousness, of being conscious of our own self,
Hmm.
is such a delicate area, I think. um Again, there's a fine line between being obsessed with yourself, internally obsessed,
Yeah.
and also understanding that um our consciousness is also outside of ourselves.
Hmm.
And let me try to explain where I'm going with this. A lot of times I will encourage people to do a dynamic movement, an adult. Let's get away from cartwheels for a second, but even things like bear crawling or crab walks, if you're familiar with those
Yeah,
exercises,
absolutely.
people feel foolish when they are seen doing those exercises. A lot of my workouts I do outside in parks, and so it's a public space, and I love that factor because we are public creatures. Isolating ourselves is not a good long term solution, for total body health. And so, we've got to admit that we are public, we are social creatures, which demands that we get outside of ourselves. What I come into what the problem that I come into a lot of times with clients is they feel self-conscious as they are asked or encouraged to do a cartwheel in a public park. The first thing they do is they look over their shoulders, and it's I want who could be there watching me about to make a fool out of myself.
Right.
And so there's that aspect that we have to deal with. And again, I would encourage more people to try and get over that idea of novelty and doing new movements, in a public space, because there are those factors that are going to be there in life. You are going to come into contact with other people. You are going to have to wrestle feelings of anxiety and, not measuring up, and all of those things. And again, if we can combine the bodily practice to that whole picture, I think we're going to be better off, as opposed to putting our headphones on, being secluded as we walk into the big box gym, not making eye contact with a single other person, pretending nobody is there, and then attempting to, work on ourselves. I think the entire idea is counterintuitive.
Yeah, I agree. And I was chuckling when you were saying that because it's like, you're looking around to see who's watching. You know, everybody else is caught up in their own little cage and they're on their own little rat wheel. They don't
They
even,
don't care.
you may have fallen down. People don't care. They may
They
ask
know.
if you're okay. I fell on the ice the other day, and at first, because there were
Oh,
people out and I heard somebody yell, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine." I hurt my pride. But momentarily, it's like, did anybody see me fall? And then I heard that voice and somebody's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, whatever. I fell on the ice. Get up, move on.
well, and exactly. And the thing with a bodily practice is I feel like the chance to put that into action more often. One of the things that I've started doing on my own personal front is I've started boxing a little bit. 100% green.
Hmm.
Never boxed in my life, and it's humbling, because I've done a lot of wrestling. I've had some success at that. I know that world. That world's been packed down and condensed into my subconscious. I could
Yeah.
do it, at the snap of a finger. But I've noticed that the bodily practice for me of boxing has opened up this Pandora's box of making me feel insufficient, of making me feel sometimes vulnerable. All of these icky shadow side feelings that if I want to continue building a skill set in this area of boxing, I'm going to have to deal with these things that pop up, and I'm going to have to manage them. And so, managing that idea of self-consciousness, while, obviously you have to look inside yourself to begin these practices, but not becoming too consumed inside
Right.
of yourself is the idea. And again, I think play helps us do that. By nature, we play with others. If you watch young kids, it doesn't take them long to start poking at each other, even strange kids, and there's a little bit of a play language, and next thing you know, they're kind of tossing a ball back and forth, and they're playing. And I think that if we do focus on play, what happens automatically is we incorporate the social aspect in balance as well.
Yeah.
The give and the take that's required to play a game. One of my favorite analogies or examples to bring up is the sport of MMA,
Hmm.
and how violent and how battle like, how warlike it may seem to the casual observer. I always bring back the idea that these guys are playing. There's just a proper balance of play within MMA. They're playing with their striking ability. They're playing with their ground game. It's a highly sophisticated and aggressive form of play, but there's still a respect between the two competitors. Um, None of the competitors is going to bring a switchblade in to the cage.
Hmm.
None of the competitors is going to bring a six shooter to shoot the other one after the fight. So as crazy and as barbaric as MMA seems, those guys are in there playing. There's an established game with proper boundaries, and within those boundaries, chaos can ensue, and it's going to be contained by rules and so on and so forth. So it's just another way of looking at how maybe in its most volatile form, two combatants battling it out inside of a cage is actually a form of very serious play. Because again, you find that you ask a fighter what's going on through his mind during that fight, he can't tell you. He's in flow state. He's
Yeah.
playing. Now, the consequences are very severe. Just like if you were playing amongst the treetops, jumping from limb to limb, as some young kids like to do, there's a factor of danger, and there's a factor of violence that could be there, but it's that factor, the factor of violence, the factor of chaos, if contained properly in a set of order with a purpose, it's simply play. And again, the social aspect to that, I think, is worth paying attention to. The way that those combatants, 9 times out of 10, how they leave the cage with each other, and that sort of transformation that happens with the bodily practice of MMA fighting.
Yeah, I love the way it's like you're overlaying play over a transitional situation where your muscles, it's muscle memory. You're learning new muscle memory, or you're rebuilding old muscle memories, and you go back to your boxing analogy, different movements from wrestling. I know you're a, accomplished wrestler, and so there's some things that are similar, but there's a lot of nuances and muscle memory that are different. And so you have to like train your muscles until your subconscious remembers that. But in that process, you're thinking of it as a component of play. And I think a good short example would be if you're right-handed, get up in the morning, try to brush your teeth with your left hand. Look in the mirror and see, you're going to have toothpaste all over your face because you know how to do this. Your subconscious brain, your muscles are trained to do this, if you're right-handed. But if you try to do it with your left hand, it is, you're going to be poking your teeth and your chin and until you do that over and over and over, like we were talking about with the analogy of, going down the hallway on every Friday, you'll get to that point. But it's that same kind of approach to anything with and
Yeah,
look at it with play, laugh, let your toothpaste get all over your face, see how that compares with what you're describing.
I think it's spot on. And though a simple example, I, I
Mhm.
encourage I encourage people to do exactly that. Um, and it's funny because need we can't handle that much novelty, to be honest. When I'm talking about adding chaos and adding novelty and adding playful elements to our life, it can be
Mhm.
just as simple as that. In fact, the bigger the change you make, the odds are it's just not going to happen. Use a game analogy. Kids will start playing a game and give it 10 or 15 minutes, and the rules are going to be attempted to change. And that is okay. That's also a development of proper play is, hey, instead of taking it back to this line, let's just take it back to the half court line, and then we can resume play, and all the players agree that this is the new thing that we're going to do. So
Right.
rather than brush our teeth every morning with the right hand, you get your players, all of your personalities, to agree that, hey, let's just try it with our left hand and see what happens, and add that bit of novelty to your life. Because again, I think that we're just not talking about exercise. We're talking about the way that we approach problems.
Yeah.
We have a problem as a human being with our health, and the problem is it's something that's got to be maintained consistently and throughout the remainder of our life. That poses a major problem to most of us daily, and we have to find a solution to this problem. And the solution to the problem of our entire body's health at the age of 25 is not going to be the solution to that problem at the age of 35. And it's not going to be the solution that is going to be there when you're 45. So, essentially what we're talking about is just problem solving. And
Mhm.
we're up against these obstacles. I do believe, again, in that playful idea of, hey, let's tinker with this a little bit, because what I've been doing up until this point has only worked so well, or maybe it hasn't worked at all. And if we can play with this, if we can wrestle with this, I don't, whatever analogy we want to use, but it's funny that we use those analogies as we think. Even at a round table of business people, executives, the amount of metaphor that goes from the way we think to the way we move is astounding. Hey, let's
Yeah.
bounce this idea around a little bit. What are we bouncing? What exactly are we bouncing around? But intuitively, we know what that CEO meant. He
Yeah.
wants us to he wants us to play with the idea a little bit. He wants us to maybe bounce it that way instead of always bouncing it this way. And by accident, maybe by design of our right brain that knows more of what's going on than everything else. I don't know how it generally works, because again, it's sometimes like magic. Lo and behold, you play with something, you play with a topic in your mind, and you get somewhere with it. You make progress. You find yourself in a more advantageous position, and um, and then you do the process all over again, because that becomes routinized. That new position of advantage that you found yourself at becomes the new norm. That stimuli becomes the new default setting, and we have to find some way to progress and play with the next topic. So I've found that the perspective of play, and play done properly, again, not frivolously, play in a serious form, is, it's the language we speak. It's really the language that we we forgot how to speak is
Right.
probably a better way to put it. I don't know what age it is that people tend to get serious with life, but I think that might be maybe where we should go back to the drawing board and figure out just why we chose to get serious and in what dimension.
Yeah, well, life happens along the way, and you just gotta navigate yourself back home, wherever that is in your own mind. Hey, we are like almost at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I really appreciate you spending so much time talking
Yeah.
today. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to, reach out to you for more information? I know you've got some different programs that you offer.
Yeah, I got
What are maybe some next steps, takeaways that you can recommend as we wrap up?
So I do a lot of different forms of coaching. One-on-one coaching
Hmm.
is always available, and to get started with my one-on-one coaching, there'll be a link in the in the video notes. We start with just a simple form. What I do is relational, um, and what I mean by that is with my one-on-one clients, I establish a relationship, and we go from there to improve their bodily practice. But it begins with just a simple survey of finding out if we're going to be able to work together and work together well. And so I can provide that link in the video notes. And the other way that people can learn more about what it is that I do is just join my online account membership. So what it is it's every month I provide it's weekly actually. I provide dynamic movements and multiple levels of which people can use to get started, because that's the biggest thing. The biggest question I think you kind of posed earlier is where do I begin?
Yeah,
If I don't know what, a lot of what I say kind of leaves people saying, okay, that makes sense, but without that left brain, where exactly do I begin is what everybody wants to know. And
right.
that can be a difficult question to answer, and it varies per person. But within my membership group, each week we get a chance to practice and try, for most people, a movement that's quite new, or at least has not been tried since grade school times. And the results have been great because they're just truly eye opening for a lot of people. Humbling maybe at times, but just eye opening of holy smokes, this is where I'm at, and this is where I'm going to begin my journey. The the best part about that, and the best part of the monthly group that I'm in, is that you can see when you're progressing. You can see that you're no longer doing the movement that is just the initial steps, and you can begin building that skill set. And we talk about, the neurobiology these days is big about dopamine and oxytocin, and we use these chemicals. Those chemicals are important. We narrow down and we call that dopamine as the most important chemical, but I think we tend to forget that it's actually a movement driven, it's a practice driven result from our movement that gives us that dopamine in our brain.
Yeah, I love that because it really goes back to, your body and its capability. The human body is just amazing in what it can do and how it can recover and rebuild itself naturally. Um, and the nice thing about what you're suggesting, and I will post, your links for individuals to access, and it sounds like, this is kind of a community effort, so folks can, you know, make their goals or, work with you and decide individually what it is that they want to do, and you're going to help them through that. But there's also a community of like-minded people that are trying to learn how to stand on one leg or not learn to, but get back to those fundamental basics and get to the point where, they have an encouragement when they can say, hey, I did my first cartwheel in 50 years.
It never gets old. I get sent cartwheel videos all week, and the initial cartwheels from people that, it's just incredible to see exactly that you just mentioned. and to be able to share it with others. We got to remember we're social creatures. We've got to get outside of ourselves a little bit, be strong to be useful, be balanced to be of service to others. You know, what we do in our practice for ourselves is much stronger if we can share it. This stuff needs to be shared. The idea of community is inescapable as a human being. We are nested in community. You are nobody without your parents. You are nobody. You can call yourself a plumber all day long. If you don't have customers, if you don't have relationships, you're not a plumber. And so it's really important that we realize, and that's what my monthly membership group helps to establish for people, is that this is bigger than just yourself. You've got to get outside yourself, and you've got to contribute to the community. And it's funny how when people are reminded of that fact, how the pressure is almost taken off. We care
Yeah.
more about upsetting ourselves, and this idea of being self-conscious is we can be our own worst critic so many times. And when you allow people to understand that you're not just doing this for yourself, you have a role within our community, even if you're the most beginner, because the community wants to see you grow. And when the community sees you grow, you help them. And so we can't get away from that idea of community and that idea of relationships as being pivotal to any sort of positive transformation.
Dude, that's a beautiful note to end on. I'm going to say let's wrap up there. I love that message. Again, thank you so much for hopping on and talking through this with us. And
You bet.
I will get some links from you and put them on the site, and hopefully, folks will reach out and start their journey.
Hey, I appreciate it, Steve. Thank you very much for putting this together this morning.
Absolutely. Take care, Randy. Thank you.
Hey, have a great day, buddy.
All right. Thanks, you too.